everyone, this is Mella from Mella Reads. Today I have gone a little bit dramatic, a little bit gothic in my mood because as I mentioned recently, I went through a period of grieving and it really drew me towards reading and watching some sort of like gothic and horror sort of fiction. I think it was a desire to draw myself away from the horrors of my real life into some fictional or fantastical horrors, which is a really interesting little phenomenon that happened. Now, I have two reviews I'm going to do today. One of them is for Mexican Gothic, which was already on my reading list before this happened, but I think I'm going to start off with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I probably would not have been too interested in picking up before this happened. So I listened to a really excellent audiobook version of it narrated by Dan Stevens, who I know as Matthew from Downton Abbey, and he did a fabulous job, I think, of the different voices and capturing the mood of the novel. And I got that for free on BorrowBox through my library. So I do have a copy here that's been on my shelf for many, many years because I know it's a classic and I want to read classics, but I've picked it up and flicked through it a couple of times, but mostly I stuck to the audiobook, and I highly recommend if you have access to it. Just going to give you a quick overview of the story of Frankenstein because, you know, embarrassingly, I didn't really know what it was about. I knew that Frankenstein was the creator of a monster, and you know, this book's over 200 years old, so if you don't know the story, I don't think I feel bad about spoiling any aspects of it, but I guess it's an epistolary novel, so the framing, as I feel it was common, especially in the 19th century, was that it took the form of letters, mostly from the narrator, who was Robert Walton, who is like a non-character in the story really. He's just there to narrate it, and his letters to his sister. He's on an expedition into the Arctic. I don't really think it matters except for the fact that he came across Victor Frankenstein in pursuit of the creature, and so Frankenstein tells Robert Walton his tale of what's led him up until that point, and then Robert Walton's writing it in letters back to his sister, and that's the book we're reading. And you sort of sometimes are getting third and fourth hand narration put into these letters. It can be a little bit confusing, but I think that's part of why I found the audiobook really helpful, because Dan Stevens, he does obviously slightly different voices for whoever's narrating at that point in time, which was helpful for me. So there's a bit of backstory for Frankenstein. I don't think it's that important, but what is important is that he gets into this almost frenzy of wanting to create a living being with the cutting edge sort of alchemy of the time. The exact process used to create the creature is not described, and I came across a comment that Mary Shelley, she was more interested in the implications of science rather than the process itself, and that is very clear in this story. You may have heard the claim that this is like the first science fiction novel, and I don't think I feel strongly either way on that. She does describe his chemistry equipment more than once, but like I said, the science isn't a focus of it. It's more the existential crisis that the creature has once he's been created, and the choices that Frankenstein has to make following on from that. So Frankenstein creates a creature, he's disgusted by what he's done, and he bails. And then a large chunk of the novel is the creature realizing he's alive, trying to work out how to survive, and trying to work out where he fits into the world. And I didn't know that was a part of the novel, and it was sad. I was about 2/3 of the way through the book, where the creature has just finished telling Frankenstein what he's been up to since he was created, and he's had rejections from humans because he looks like hideous, and at the same time he's read some of the greatest works that the Western world's produced. He's observed acts of kindness between people and grace and compassion and all of these beautiful things, and he wants to be ethical and virtuous, but he's not been given an in into society. He's being treated like a monster. And so I guess the last third of the novel is sort of him becoming that monster, and where he and Frankenstein end up because of that. Actually really depressing. And I guess that there's all sorts of things you could read into that, whether Shelley intended it or not, about where do we fit in the world, how do we find our purpose, what guidance should we be given, or do we need to be given to fulfill our best lives and be useful members of society. The creature was incredibly eloquent. He's nothing like those old like horror movie depictions you might have seen where he's kind of like a green zombie lurching around. He's physically fit and flexible, and he is clever and eloquent. And actually Frankenstein warns the main narrator at one point that he should be careful, because if he meets the monster will probably put forward a very good case for himself, because he's able to just be very persuasive in his language. Super interesting, and I'm so glad I read it. In terms of it being like where it fits within literary movements, there's sort of like the Romanticism movement that Mary Shelley was very much influenced by. She grew up in this incredibly rich literary sort of environment where her mother and her father were both social commentators, and her father was also a novelist. They had famous romantic poets coming in and out of the family home, like Coleridge was a family friend. She refers to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner she alludes to it quite early on in the novel. And of course, the origin of this story came out of a very famous weekend or a holiday in Geneva, where there was Lord Byron, romantic poet, P.B. Shelley, later on Mary Shelley's husband, also a romantic poet, and John Polidori, who wrote a book called The Vampire that's sort of like one of the first cohesive vampire novels we have. And they, Lord Byron set them a challenge of coming up with the best ghost story while they were stuck inside because the weather was horrible. And that was the environment in which Mary Shelley developed Frankenstein. And she was a teenager, so like props to the young people out there that are doing amazing things. She just didn't, I don't think if I didn't know she was a teenager, I would have known that a teenager wrote this. So super impressive. And there's definitely, so as well as the romanticism in it, the majesty of nature, and even, you see a lot of that discovery through the creature's eyes, but also that Gothic influence that was coming in sort of from the mid-18th century, and sort of, I think this would be considered a key Gothic text, but I'm not sure for me it fully fits in the movement, because there is an atmosphere, like a foreboding, almost claustrophobic atmosphere in the storytelling. But I think what I prefer in my Gothic is less horror and more unknowns, if that makes sense. So more the thrill of the suspense of the things are not how they should be, but you're not quite sure why, or maybe there isn't an actual monster that's the reason, it's just humans, because humans are kind of messed up. And in this, there is a very clear, the creature becomes monstrous, and I think for some people that's, it probably fits more into the idea of like Gothic horror rather than just like Gothic. I think I'm interested to watch some film adaptations, particularly the 1931 Universal, which was like very key in developing the public image of Frankenstein's monster the way we think of him. I may give an update depending how long it takes me to watch it. I think one other thing I wanted to touch on was the subtitle when it was originally published, which is Modern Prometheus. And I had to go and look this up because I think I knew like one thing about Prometheus, but my knowledge of Greek mythology is not good. And so Prometheus was making humans out of clay for Zeus. And the reason Prometheus ends up in trouble is firstly, I think, because he was giving Zeus like subpar humans. And then Zeus was mad and he withheld fire, but Prometheus gave fire to the humans, and then he gets punished and he has like a bird pecking out his liver for all eternity or something. But there's a couple of reasons that I think Shelley used Prometheus for the subtitle. So obviously Frankenstein is the main character of this story, and he creates essentially a human. It's a sentient being, it's made from human parts, it has human needs and desires. And so Prometheus was making humans out of clay. But then I think there's something in there around, so the creature in Frankenstein is a vegetarian, and I think Shelley and her gang at the time thought vegetarianism was the more ethical choice, and there's something in there about her thinking that Prometheus was evil because he gave humans fire, which gave us sort of an easy entryway into eating meat. I don't know if that's all like too much of a stretch, that like I don't know. Let's just drop that one. Anyway, I was very impressed by Frankenstein. Highly recommend you read it. I hope I've given away enough to like show you how beautiful of a story it is. I will definitely be revisiting it, but not so much that you don't need to read it. I am very hungry, so I'm gonna go eat, and then I will come back and I will talk about Mexican Gothic and derivative fiction and fan fiction and all that sort of thing. So you should check that out as well. And if you want to chat about Frankenstein in a bit more detail, tell me your read on just like what Shelley's trying to say, or its value to us today, 200 years later. Be really interested to have a chat in the comments, and thanks for watching. Bye.